food, please continue to do so. We're going to have a presentation by Cody Bodin, a technical expert from Microsoft, but before we get to that, I'm going to start with some of the other items here. Whoops. So we'll be following our regular agenda here, except really, the meeting format is informal. So each subs has questions. This will be informal, but we do want to thank Stan Miller, Stan in the back, Jim Beardsley, and Al Rivard for the food. Not sure where everyone's sitting here now, if they're all in the back. Al there. So thank you guys. Future meetings. Note that next month it is again on Thursday, and Tom will be presenting on activity trackers. We will be meeting here in the Baltic room again. The MAC-SIG is meeting tomorrow, but starting next month, they will be switching to their summer schedule, so they'll be on Wednesdays. So that's all out on the website, but just a reminder for all of that. The club officers, I don't see Linda. Linda Brown is our vice president. Paul Ebert is our membership secretary, but he's got some activities going on. So in the interim, we have Lowell Tews serving as membership secretary. Mike Griffin, treasurer and MAC-SIG. I don't see Mike. Stan Miller, sandwich czar and secretary in the back of the room. Andrew Petron is our communications coordinator. I expected to see Andrew, so maybe he'll come in a little late. Tom Kreutzer, director at large. And I'm Jim Homan. Oh, Andrew's in Sweden. I didn't get that update. So as we mentioned, Lowell right now is collecting dues. So if you have those, let Lowell know. If anyone wants to join, you can turn that in to Lowell as well. And make sure that if your email changes, you let Lowell know. That's how we keep in touch with you. If you have any suggestions for topics, email them to us. Talk to any of the board members, or if you'd like to give a presentation on any topic, things that you use at home or at work, or if you want to write an article for the eBites newsletter, let us know, or you can email into Tom. You can find the link to do that on the website. You can also find out on the website the past meeting slides and handouts, recordings, the deal section, and the eBites newsletter. And if you have any suggestions for that, again, you can email that to Tom or submit it by the link on the website. So for example, the latest May eBites is out there. It's got these articles, including some information on Windows 10, but we're going to get the latest and greatest straight from Microsoft here. So are there any questions? If not, please help me in welcoming Cody Bodin, who's going to tell us about Windows 10.
Thank you. All right, I'm just going to grab the presenter role here. Hopefully we can see both in the recording and here in the room. All right. Get back to the beginning of my presentation. Okay, so I'm Cody Bodin. Thank you again for inviting me out to speak with you today about Windows 10. I'm a technology specialist with Microsoft. I focus specifically on Windows. So we have a lot of really interesting things going on, obviously, with Windows 10 and the announcements and the updates and the things we've been adding over the last several months. Keep in mind, Windows 10 is still a little bit of a work in progress. We're getting really close to being done with the build up for Windows 10, and then we'll move forward with an RTM and a general availability. We expect those things to occur this summer. So, I mean, we're getting pretty close at this point. If you haven't seen Windows 10, and that might be an interesting place to start, who has actually seen Windows 10 or downloaded and installed the technical preview that's available? Has anybody actually seen it? Not really? Okay. Maybe one or two? Okay. So there's a technical preview that's available, and it's been ever evolving and growing since we released it back last fall. What I'm going to show you today is the same build that's publicly available. So the same things that you can go and download and test today are the things that you'll see me kind of walk through and show you. But there's also some things that are yet to come in the technical preview, things that just haven't been added yet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those things too, because they're important and they're good for, we want to make sure that you're aware of what's coming in Windows 10. And just, to be honest, some of those things just aren't quite there yet in the builds. So we started this back last fall. We really wanted to do Windows differently than we have in the past. We have what's called now the Windows Insider program, where you as customers and as enthusiasts, you can download preview builds of Windows and provide feedback and help us build Windows according to your needs and your requests. So I'll show you a few things that have actually been changed in the builds due to customer feedback, and we're really trying to embrace customer feedback with Windows 10. You'll see as we step through, some things have changed from Windows 8 and 8.1. Based largely on feedback. There were a couple of things there that we got a lot of really interesting feedback on, and we've made adjustments accordingly. So to get started, I do have a slide deck here that we'll talk about and we'll talk to, but largely what I'll try to do is spend time actually in the build and in the OS, talking about capabilities, looking at what it looks like, that kind of thing. But there's three main areas of my slide presentation, and it's broken down into these categories. Basically, we'll start with talking about what our thoughts were around building Windows 10 from a UI perspective, from a use case perspective. We'll talk about the security enhancements that are in Windows 10 and coming in Windows 10. And then we'll talk about kind of how Windows is going to grow from here and where it's going to go after we release Windows 10. To start with, I'll maybe just start by hitting a key point of the third bullet there, or the third section right off the bat. This is really the beginning of a Windows as a service type of a build out for us. What we mean by that is Windows is going to grow beyond Windows 10 in iterative monthly updates. So we're getting away from this requirement and need for big upgrades, 3-year cycles between upgrades, those types of things. And very much like other OSs that you might be using, we're going to be adding content and adding capabilities as we roll forward. So this is, in some regards, kind of the last time we'll be doing this from a Windows perspective. So to start with, we'll talk kind of about how what we were focusing on, what we are focusing on with Windows 10. Really around the user experience. That's a key point for us. We'll talk about what that really means. We'll have a look at it. We'll also talk about modern devices. So I'm presenting today off my Surface Pro, which can be a laptop, can be a tablet. It's obviously a touch-enabled device, and it can work in different ways. So we want Windows to be agile and adjust to the way that I'm interacting with the device. We'll look at that a little bit. There are some other things here that I commonly talk to when I work with specific customers. I might mention some things around the Internet of Things and industry-type solutions. I probably won't spend too much time on those things today, but it's important to kind of understand from our perspective what we're trying to cover with Windows 10. I also like to show this slide because it's one, it's interesting, but two, it talks about what we're trying to do here with Windows in general. This slide represents the platforms that now live under the umbrella of Windows inside of Microsoft. So it includes things like the Xbox and Windows on PCs and Windows on phones. Windows on devices too, and interestingly, that's things like the Internet of Things, but it's also devices like HoloLens. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. If you haven't heard about HoloLens, it's a really interesting new piece of technology that we're working on that is a Windows 10 device. But the idea here is that what we're trying to do with Windows 10 is we're trying to converge all of these platforms so that we can take the best parts of these individual platforms and use them across the stack of technology, of devices. And also from a management perspective and a application development perspective, we can write what we're calling Windows apps, universal apps. What that will allow us to do is build one application, and it will run natively on an Xbox, on a phone, on a PC, on the HoloLens, on a number of different devices. So when you're looking at this from a perspective of from the lens of a developer, a software developer, you write one piece of code and it's now applicable across this wide array of interesting devices. But when you're thinking about how that works from an end user perspective, there's some really interesting things that can occur. I'll talk to you a little bit about something called continuum, and where we see this ability to sway kind of back and forth between different use cases on devices. Because of this convergence platform, things like the Windows Phone that I have up here is really a Windows PC in the future, running unified Windows apps, just like they're running on my PC here today. So when I do things like connect my phone to an external monitor, it's going to show me this Windows app in the exact same way that I'd see it if I launched it from my Surface. Some really interesting capabilities that are coming with this idea of converging the platforms. Along with that, too, you're going to see some of the pieces of these individual platforms show up in interesting places. For example, the video rendering engine from Xbox is DirectX 12. And so that's now part of Windows. And you'll see as we walk through here, there's other things from other platforms that are going to now be available across all of these things. And when I say across all these different device types, this is really what I'm referring to. It is everything from the phone up through the phablets and 2-in-1s, the classic laptops, desktops, all the way up through the Internet of Things, the Xbox, and what we're calling now the Surface Hub. So this is, the Surface Hub is, it's commonly used for conference room type scenarios. It's a wall-mounted device. It's touch-enabled, hundreds of points of simultaneous touch. It is the evolution of something that was called perceptive pixel. If you've heard that in the past. But this is what we're targeting. And along with this, and I should really update my slide, but I'll just pop over and show you. Along with that is the HoloLens. So if you haven't seen the HoloLens, there's videos you can see. It was shown in a separate session a few months back, but it was also highlighted at the Build conference at Ignite. So there's a lot you can see. But what this does, it's a device that you wear that projects holograms into your environment. So what this is showing us is the view of what someone would see if they were wearing this device. Now keep in mind, the apps that we see here, this calendar application, the Skype app, these are universal Windows apps. So that is the exact same Skype app that would run on my phone, on my PC, on my Xbox, same calendar app, and those types of things. And here's a picture of someone who's actually wearing one, and they're visually rendering what a change to the design of this motorcycle might look like. We have some really interesting use cases, we think, and our customers have affirmed this, on what this could do from a technology perspective. Is it a consumer device? I don't know. We'll have games and things like that, but probably not initially anyway. But it represents a really interesting shift or departure from what we've been doing traditionally at Microsoft. This is something that will be available later this year. It's fundamentally a Windows 10 device. And so all the things we're talking about from an application perspective, a management perspective, it's all applicable to this device as well. So let's talk a little bit about the user experience. The first bullet on this slide is really important for us. This has to be a very easy and natural transition from Windows 7 because we realize that the vast majority of our customers are still using Windows 7. Windows 8 had some really interesting things, and you'll see that we haven't totally abandoned Windows 8 and the things we added, but we need to ensure that this is not cumbersome or onerous or troubling to get to from Windows 7. Oops. Go back one. So one of the things, with that kind of in mind, one of the things that we've announced, and just to make sure you're all aware, there'll be no charge to upgrade to Windows 10 if you have a Windows 7, Windows 8, or Windows 8.1 PC. So your home PC that's running one of those operating systems, you'll receive an update from Windows Update that you can choose. It won't be a requirement, totally up to you. But if you would like to get to Windows 10, you can do it free of charge. No charge whatsoever to get to Windows 10. The only requirement is, what we're saying is that offer will be available for the first year once Windows 10 is released. So we're targeting a midsummer release of Windows 10, so figure between, midsummer this year and midsummer next year. If you choose, if you would like, you can absolutely upgrade to Windows 10. We'll talk about what that means too and how that will be accomplished, because it's really quite interesting. So I also showed you a list of some devices that are all running Windows. we really want to have a familiar and common experience across those devices as it pertains to management, user experience, how apps render and how apps are used. That doesn't mean that an application will run in the exact same way on a Surface Hub device and on a phone. But what it does mean is that they should be familiar, and the app will render accordingly based on the attributes of the device where you happen to be executing the app. Now, on the list, it does have things like phones and tablets and PCs, and we understand that, there apparently are other vendors who make phones and tablets, and so many of you are probably using things that aren't running Windows. But what we want to try to drive for here is commonality and simplification, and from a Windows user perspective, nothing should be different about picking up a Windows PC or a Windows tablet or a Windows phone. It should be common, it should be easy to adopt, and basically reduce some of the barriers that we know we put in place with things like Windows 8 and some of the things that we changed about Windows 8. So you'll see as we actually look at the operating system here that some of those things that maybe were a little unique about Windows 8 have changed for the better, and so we'll talk about that. We also want to give people the ability to set their own controls. Sure, IT organizations can set standards and policies and lock things down or enable things in different ways, but as a user, if you want to change something, you should have the ability to do so, especially if it's your personal device. So you'll see that some of the things, again, that maybe you didn't have a lot of control over in previous versions of Windows, you now do, and you can set things accordingly. So with that in mind, let's actually have a look at Windows 10. So like I said, this is the currently available public build of Windows 10. It's really small in the corner here, but this is build 10,122. That's the one you can go download today and see exactly what I'm showing here. So let's start in kind of maybe one of the obvious spots with the Start menu. One of the big points of feedback we received about Windows 8 and 8.1 was that, where's my Start menu? Why did we move that? Why did we change that? And how do we get it back? And so one of the things that we commonly, especially me, talking with our customers, we commonly hear are, I'm not going to adopt Windows 8 because things change, and I don't want that change. There's no use case for that change. So we have added the Start menu back, and you see it's kind of an interesting blend between Windows 7 and Windows 8. So on the left-hand side here, I can click on All Apps, and I can navigate in a very similar way as I could in Windows 7. Things are alphabetized. I have subfolders. I can do things like you would expect in Windows. But on the right-hand side, I also have live tiles, kind of that Windows 8 modern look and feel for apps. So if I have things here like news tickers or sports tickers or things like that, these will be refreshing, giving me new content and new information. These are fundamentally yours to configure however you wish. I can do things here like I can unpin this, meaning remove it from my view. I can resize it. I can turn off the live tile aspect of it if I choose. I can move things from the list on the left over to the right. You can really make it how you would like. One of the things that we added based on feedback was the ability to grab this and change it, make it lay out in different ways. It was kind of a static build in earlier versions of Windows 10. But based on the feedback that we heard, we've just added that one little piece there where you can adjust this if you would like to. So along with this, let's have a look at what a modern application looks like. And so when I say modern app, what I'm talking about, Windows 8 introduced this idea. First they were called Metro apps, then we changed that because I think someone may have sued us to modern apps. And now they're called Windows apps. But so I'll launch what's a modern app here, and this is the store. In Windows 8 and 8.1, modern apps would run in full screen, immersive, modern user experience, modern UI, which has its place, we think. And its place primarily is on touch devices, maybe tablets, things along those lines. But we wanted to give options for users. So what you see here is a modern app running in a window on my desktop. So I can do things like have my modern apps running and a traditional desktop app like Word running, side by side, overlapping, windowed, tiled, however we want to do this. In Windows 8, we simply couldn't do this because this modern application would have been running in either full screen mode or taking up either 1/3 or 2/3 of my screen if I chose to split the screen between multiple apps. We think this is going to help on a number of different levels, but one of the things that was commonly expressed to us was it's frustrating to leave the desktop to go into this modern UI, immersive modern UI, and then to get back from there to the desktop in Windows 8. And that's true. Some of the apps that off the bat or defaulted to the modern UI were things like picture viewers and PDF viewers. So if you received a PDF or a picture and you clicked on it, it would bring you to the modern UI full screen immersive viewer for that type of document. To get back from there to the desktop, you'd either have to go, hit the Windows key and choose the desktop, or do some combination of closing the app and getting back to the desktop. All things that are doable, of course, but they introduced requirements for training and for someone to tell you how to do this. And we want to get rid of as many of those things as we can in Windows 10. It shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't be complex. It should be just like Windows has been, for the last, number of years. It should be easy to adopt and familiar. So with those things in mind, the idea here is that a modern app will run in a window on your desktop, and it won't bring you out of the desktop. It shouldn't be jarring. It shouldn't cause confusion. So a few other things that we've added here. There's something that we've had for a while called Snap, and so I can take an application and I can snap it to the right here, and let's see if this is going to work in the current builds. Let's try bringing it over here. So some changes have been made to how this works. One of them is the ability for me to take an app and snap it to the corners instead of just to the sides. With that in mind, I can snap things now to the 4 quadrants, really, of a given display. So if I have multiple displays, I now have additional areas where I can snap things. Where in the past, I may have had to do some amount of, clicking and dragging like this to get this to fit just right in the corner. In previous builds, and just for your understanding, I installed this build yesterday morning. In previous builds, the OS will actually prompt me, hey, you've snapped something. Do you want to snap something alongside of it? My assumption is that's a feature of this build as well. It's probably just been disabled in this current build. So you'll probably see that come and go as we iterate through between now and general availability. But the idea is to make things a little easier as we try to lay out content and display applications in given ways. With that also in mind, we've added the idea of multiple desktops. And this isn't something like multiple Explorer processes or anything like that. This isn't a virtual machine running in the background. This is just a way for me to lay out content in different ways. So I have one desktop where I've been working off of thus far in the presentation. And if I have a look here, I've built a few others. If I go to desktop 2, it's a blank slate. I can now lay out additional content on this desktop. Commonly what we hear, what the use case is, especially for folks who might be in IT, I want one desktop where I have all my administrative tools, things like command line and PowerShell and maybe Active Directory and whatever tools that they're responsible for, laid out the way they want, configured the way that they want. And then I have another desktop where I have things like email and maybe Link or communication applications. Again, not fighting for real estate, but just laid out in the way that makes the best use for that screen size. And you can have as many desktops as you choose. The way that things work in the builds as of today, if I'm on desktop 2 and I click on something that's running in desktop 1, like the browser, I'm brought to the browser on desktop 1. If I want to switch where something is, I can simply click on it and drag it and drop it onto the new desktop. So that's where it'll be running from. So the idea here is, again, just to help people try to lay out content in ways where they're not necessarily having to fight for screen space. So I mentioned before in that convergence slide that we'll start to see bits and pieces of different platforms show up. And one of those examples is the notification center. Very much like on a phone, this is a notification center in Windows where I see things like my daughter has a field trip coming up. I'm being prompted by an application here. In this case, it's the Windows Feedback app to provide feedback based on the build of Windows. Here's some emails that I've received. Hey, the Twins won last night. I have a restart required. These are things that are occurring because of things I've either enabled or installed and they're being aggregated to this section of the desktop. So as a user, I can click one spot and I can get kind of an overview of what's happening with me on that device. Very much like a phone, where you can swipe down or whatever the gesture might be to get a list of all these types of things. Along with that, another piece from our phone is something called Cortana. So Cortana is our personal assistant. There are others, OK Google and Siri. But we have some pretty high aspirations for Cortana. So you're going to see it's integrated in a lot of our products. It's in the phone. It's in Windows. It's going to be in Office. It's in the new browser that I'll show you here in a moment. And we really want it to be able to do things on our behalf so that we don't necessarily have to do those things anymore. So sure, it can do things like tell you the weather, tell you the Twins won last night, give you directions. One of the things I was testing earlier, you can actually speak to this. And that's one thing that I've disabled because it wasn't exactly working in this preview build as advertised. But the idea is you can speak naturally to this and say things like, what's the capital of St. Paul? Or what's the capital of Minnesota? And it'll say St. Paul, of course. But you can do other things too, like show me all files with 3M in the body or in the text. And it will search my files locally and my OneDrive for Business files, if I've allowed it to, and show me all those files. Or schedule a meeting between myself and a coworker when we both have a free hour this week. It'll look at my calendar, it'll look at my coworker's calendar, it'll find availability, and it'll propose options for scheduling that meeting. There's a lot that we think Cortana can do because every one of us has some amount of data that represents what we're doing. It can be things like calendar information. It can be things like the data on our PC, files that we're working on, things we're collaborating on, things we're interested in, any number of different data points that make up this set of data that each one of us care about. What we'd really like to see Cortana do is help make sense of some of that data. So one of the examples, I'll talk to one and I'll show you another one. One of the examples, so I've turned on Cortana so it's able to do things like look at my location. And this is the new web browser, by the way. This is called Microsoft Edge. Internet Explorer is not going away. IE 11 will be part of Windows 10, but alongside of it will be this new browser. And this has Cortana integrated into it, or it integrates with Cortana, however you want to look at it. So one of the examples here, Cortana is aware of my location. If I start typing in weather, I didn't even finish typing weather in, and Cortana is able to basically assume that I'm looking for weather about where I currently happen to be. So it popped up this information here directly beneath my query and shows me my current location and the weather. Another example of this, though, because that's cool, that's kind of neat, but another example of what this can do, if you let Cortana view your calendar, you can tell it to do things like track travel plans. So if you happen to have, say you're taking a flight tomorrow and you're flying, to Atlanta or something like that. Delta Airlines, maybe you're going on Delta Airlines and you're taking a trip. If you're typing in delta.com, it'll do something very similar. Now, I don't have a flight tomorrow, so it's not actually doing this for me, but that's integration that Cortana could provide. You start typing in the location where you're trying to go to, Cortana is aware of an upcoming trip. It's going to show you things like your flight, your gate information, whether the flight's on time, any delays, that kind of thing, based on the integration between where you're browsing to and the data that Cortana has or maintains about you. All of this you can customize, and all of this you have the ability to opt into or not. But the idea here is that that's kind of a nicety that the new browser will provide. Some of that, instead of us needing to actually go to weather because we just want to know what the weather's like, let's pop it up. Instead of having to go to Delta, let's pop that up. Things along those lines. So while we're looking at the browser here, there's a couple other interesting pieces. One more piece about the Cortana integration. You can also search Cortana directly from your browser session. So, for example, here, if if we're reading an article or looking at something here, and we come across something we'd like we'd like to learn more about, we can just highlight it here and we can ask Cortana. And when we do that, we don't pop open a new browser, or a browser tab, we don't navigate away from where we are, we just simply bring up this kind of side panel here on the right-hand side. So I highlighted target field, I said ask Cortana, and here's the the data that Cortana returned to me. Location, information about it, phone number even, those types of things. But I think, if I remember right, this also has a player's name in it. So let's ask about this baseball player here. Cortana does a search and returns information about this person for me. So as you're, one of the common demos that I see people use to show this are things like searching restaurants. You get a big result of these restaurants in your area, and sure, maybe it might be on a site like Yelp or something where they're already doing ratings for you, but you could right-click on a given restaurant, get more information about it, and see if it's the type of restaurant you like to visit, if you're looking at a long list. So this is kind of interesting, though, because you see it doesn't navigate away from where I am. I can just click anywhere, and that goes away. Kind of an interesting piece that's built into Cortana, well, the integration of that in the new browser. Along with that, there's two other pieces here. There's one thing called reading mode, where when I click on that, we reformat the text in this given website so that it fits better on any device. So if margins were unique or were interesting, if there were advertisements and interesting other stuff on this website, we kind of parse through that and we would remove it and show you a little bit easier view of the data, running up and down in the center in a common format, in a familiar format. And then what we can do is, if we wanted to, we can even notate on this. So what we kind of do here is we kind of take a snapshot of this website and we allow you to notate. So, hey, I can draw on here, I can do whatever I need to do, take notes. And then I can grab this if I need to, if I want to, and I can send that out to people. I can post it somewhere so people can see it. I can send it out. So imagine a scenario where maybe you're on a website where you can buy something, Amazon, Target.com, whatever it might be. And you've navigated way down, maybe you're looking for shoes. So you click on shoes, men's shoes, size 11, work shoes, and you get way down deep, and now you're looking at the results of 4 pairs of shoes. Circle a pair of shoes that you want and send it off to somebody. Kind of an interesting, I'm not sure I would ever use that as a use case, but that's one that we've seen illustrated. But imagine that, so, in the example where maybe you're collaborating with somebody and you want to just basically write on the web, take notes on the web, call something out on an active website. You can actually do it here in Project Spartan. Edge, it was renamed Edge. Yeah, so Project Spartan was its name, or its code name, and it is now officially the Edge browser.
Question.
Yeah.
Did you draw that with your finger, or did you use?
I use my finger. It works with mouse as well for notations. In this device, I also have a stylus that I could use, but touch-enabled device, so I used just my finger for that. So one other piece here that's kind of interesting, and that it goes back to that modern device, and this is an illustration of continuum. What we're going to do here, I'm going to take the keyboard off of my Surface, and we're going to see that Windows reacts to that and changes things. So when I do this, and there we go. All right, so I'm going to say yes. Let's go into tablet mode. So I no longer have my keyboard attached. With that in mind, Windows adjusts. So things like the Start menu are now full screen because it's easier for me to click and navigate and drive with touch if things are larger, things are laid out full screen. If I go back to the store where we were previously, it is now full screen. Again, so I can scroll through and I can choose things in an easier way because I'm now interacting in a touch-centric type of a way with this device. If I click somewhere for typing, it brings up the on-screen keyboard. I don't have an attached keyboard any longer, so it knows that I'm interacting now in a different way. So it's adjusting to allow me to interact in that different way a little easier without having to change anything except basically click a button. Applications will be aware of this as well. So as we get a little bit further down the road with Windows 10 and we get closer to the actual release, you'll see applications take advantage of tablet mode. So maybe there'll be apps like our Office apps, for example, where specific interactions will be driven in non-tablet mode, but then when you go into tablet mode, maybe it enables things like the ability to draw on screen or things like that as the native or as the default input method. So now if I go back, if I just plug my keyboard back in, we'll see if it prompts me here. There we go. I'll say yes, let's exit tablet mode. And so now I'm right back where I was. The store is no longer full screen. The start menu, no longer full screen. If I click somewhere for input, for text input, no on-screen keyboard. Now keep in mind, none of that's been disabled here. It's still all there. I can still do all of that. It's just that it's, it's defaulting to the keyboard and mouse instead of prompting me for on-screen touch-centric type inputs. You'll see this on all of the devices that run Windows 10. And one of the examples, and I kind of alluded to it before, is the example of Windows 10 on a phone. So the other use case for Windows 10 on a phone, use case number one is it's a phone. Use case number two, though, is it's kind of a small PC. So it can power things like attached keyboards and mice and attached monitors. And then when you launch those universal Windows apps, because they're aware of things like attached monitors and they can render and scale appropriately, you can really do things in a really interesting way from a phone that today would require a PC. So we're not exactly there yet from a hardware perspective on the phones and from a software perspective on the phones, but that's the direction, and that's a very near-term direction. When Windows 10 is available in the summer for the PC, might be a little bit later than that for the phone, but quickly thereafter, you'll start to see some really interesting use cases around using a phone kind of as a mini PC. So are there any questions about what we're seeing in the actual build of Windows 10? There are quite a few additional things that I want to make sure I share with you. But as far as what it looks like, what is in the build today, I think we've kind of hit the highlights of what we can actually see and get our hands on at the moment. Question? Yeah.
What does Windows Explorer look like?
Yeah, so there's some. Yep. So it can be done in a couple different ways. So the Explorer looks and feels a lot like it has. There are some new options depending on what we're doing. But finding files can be done maybe a little bit easier way now because everything is based on search. So when we click down here, if I do a search, Cortana is also a search engine, by the way. So I mean, when we want to ask something or do something about files or look for a specific something on our PC, this is where we would do it. So if I were to type in Excel, this is how I would get to not only my Excel app, but also things that had Excel in the name from a web search perspective. So by and large, I mean, it looks very similar. There'll be some other interesting capabilities, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the rest of the presentation. So I like to talk about this slide because it represents another area where we're converging things. Windows in the past has been used for quite an array of different use cases and deployed in many different ways. So what this slide represents are kind of three different ways of deploying Windows as it stands today in Windows 8 or 8.1. Windows for a tablet or a PC on the left, maybe some lockdown capabilities in the middle, and then an ATM or a ticket kiosk on the right, all running Windows, but all configured and managed and locked down in different ways. Windows 10 basically brings all of these capabilities together, and so that as an organization or as an IT shop or as folks who are responsible for devices, if you want to have a PC that goes from being a regular user-based laptop one day to an ATM-like experience the next, you can do that, all from the same version of Windows. Now, from a home PC perspective, you probably don't really necessarily want to ever have a kiosk type of an experience, but the capability is there. And so what we're doing here is we're trying to make it easier, and we're trying to centralize where those capability sets live inside of Windows. No more of this distinct different OS that you might have to interact with. Let's just take those capabilities and make them all part of Windows. There'll be some really interesting changes in peripherals, we think. We'll talk a little bit more about this as it pertains to security, but we're building Windows 10 to support what we know is out there today, where we know things are going from a connectivity perspective, so that the peripherals that we're all using or the new scenarios that are popping up will be leverageable by Windows. This is a representation of that Internet of Things capability that I mentioned. I won't spend much time on it, but we know we have a lot of organizations that support devices like this. 3M could very well have devices like this that are running some version of Windows that does a very specific thing. But as administrators or as folks that are responsible for maintaining this device, we probably never in the past had ways of using our same tools or our common set of Windows tools, from a security and a manageability perspective on a device like this. But with Windows 10 and that common platform that we're building, there's a very good use case there, perhaps, about maybe just making this another Windows PC that you can manage and support and secure in a very similar way that you could do with the rest of your Windows devices. So we'll segue a little bit here into some of the security enhancements. There's some really great stuff. The first one here has to do with identity, and there's kind of two parts to this conversation. There's one part that has really come to the surface as far as our customers, our enterprise customers, and the adoption of Windows 8. So one of the big points of feedback we heard about Windows 8 was that to do things like access the store or pull down a modern application, those types of things, you had to have a personal Microsoft account. Whether it was a Hotmail account or a Live account or whatever it was, you had to have that as a user. And that's fine from a consumer perspective, but in organizations, it's really hard to manage people's personal accounts. So what we've done is we've made a change there, and we no longer require the use of a Microsoft account to do things like access the store. In its place, if you choose, you can use something that we call Azure Active Directory. This is something, Office 365, for example. If you have Office 365, that is an Azure Active Directory credential. So from a user who is using a Windows device for work-related purposes, there shouldn't be a need there to have a personal account associated. Now, obviously, on home PCs and consumer devices, that personal account will still be there, still be something you can leverage because it makes sense in that use case. But in the enterprise, we found a lot of challenges around trying to maintain and manage those personal accounts. So we removed that as a requirement. We're also doing some really interesting things as it pertains to how we want to secure credentials on a Windows PC. What we're really trying to do here is we're trying to break away from using usernames and passwords as much as we possibly can. And that pertains both from the consumer side and from the enterprise use side. As an organization, you can choose to enable things like multi-factor authentication to log on to a service, whether that's email or a SharePoint site or VPN or whatever it might be. But we're trying to also implement things that consumers can leverage. So things like biometrics, for example. One of the things that we've talked about that we'll see here shortly are devices that have cameras that are sophisticated enough to do high-quality scans of retinas so that we can really use a retinal scan as a form of authentication. We'll also have built into Windows 10 something called Windows Hello, which kind of takes a page out of the Xbox playbook, again, that convergence thing, where we do similar things that we do with the Kinect in Xbox using facial recognition. So this actually uses an infrared camera. So again, the device has to be, the device itself has to be prepared to support this, but those devices that will have these types of cameras will be able to log you in by simply scanning your face. And because it's infrared, it's not using any light. So whether it's in the dark or in broad daylight, what the camera can capture will be similar and static across both of those use cases. The whole point here is that we're seeing a number of different breaches, both on the personal consumer side, but also in the enterprise, and we really want to try to take steps to eliminating areas where we know there are vulnerabilities. And commonly, the most easily the point of the least resistance is to steal or harvest in some way someone's credentials. Start logging in as them, and we've seen it doesn't take long. If you get someone's username and password, you can do some really bad things for organizations. Some other things that you'll see on the consumer side, and we already kind of do this in Windows 8, when you associate a device with your personal account. You can do things like provide a phone number so that when you associate a second device as that account, you'll get a text to your phone. And they'll say, hey, is this really you? If it is, take that number that just came on your text, on your phone and put it back into the PC, and we'll register this PC on your behalf. So we're trying to do things to help users track the devices they're using, but also ensure that they're secure in every way that we can. There are some other areas here in the protection of credentials that I think are really, really interesting. They're pretty, in the weeds of security, but one of them is related to something called the pass the hash vulnerability. I won't dwell on it, but it's a vulnerability in Kerberos where bad things can happen if a device becomes compromised. So what we're actually doing is we're using virtualization to solve the problem as it pertains to Kerberos today. So we're starting down this path where parts of the Windows operating system may be running in a virtual shell of Windows inside of the host Windows 10 device. It's an interesting step, we think, and it's called virtual secure mode, where some of the really important and sensitive pieces of a Windows device might be actually not running on that device at all. They might be running in a virtual machine kind of under the covers, so that the known exploits that we're dealing with in the wild today are mitigated because they have no way of gaining access to those virtual machines. Some other things here too, we know in the enterprise that there's kind of this area where there's a potential where data may not be necessarily protected. When you open up an email or you open up a Word document, for example, and you start to create content, when do we actually protect that content? When we save it to an encrypted hard drive, maybe, or up to a server that might have some amount of protection on it, that might do it there as well. But what we really want to do is we want to allow Windows to help protect content as we either consume it or create it. So what you'll see in Windows 10 is kind of some automation around helping users ensure that data is protected by encrypting it as they're actually consuming it or creating it. This is more based on using Windows in the workplace perhaps, but the idea here would hold true for home use as well if you would like to have actual files encrypted to you as a user. So in the event that file was somehow posted on Facebook or shared out to an email list or whatnot, the recipient would not have any ability to open it. It's fundamentally encrypted by you as the user. Only you have access. One other piece here that is really pretty interesting is something called Device Guard. And this is kind of what we see or what we're targeting from a look towards the future of how we'd like to see Windows PCs really operate. What we're doing with Device Guard is we're giving the owner or the user the ability to basically create a very distinct list of applications, files, binaries, however you wanted to describe it, that have the ability to run on that PC. And we'll do it through code signing. The idea here is that, on many mobile devices, for example, there's really only one way to install an app. You go to the store, you install it. Now, sure, you can sideload apps on given platforms if you jailbreak them or if you root the device. But those things aside, what we want to try to do here is create a closed ecosystem for a Windows device, meaning that the only things that will execute are known, good, signed binaries. The things that were signed either by Microsoft as the provider of the OS or by the organization as the provider of the software, as the management piece of that device. Where we really see this going is a world where we don't need things like anti-spyware and antivirus and anti-malware type technologies anymore, because those bad things that occur on the web won't be in our list of known, good, approved, signed binaries, and they simply won't execute. It's not necessarily a single-click easy button to turn this on and deploy it, of course, but it's our vision. It's what we want to see as we move forward. It's, it's kind of flipping the way that we're trying to do things. Instead of trying to specifically say, let's block this because it's bad, let's flip that and say, let's allow only these because they're good. It'll take some time to adopt, of course, but it's something that Windows 10 will support. That's called Device Guard. So we'll step ahead a little bit here, and we'll talk about some of the really interesting things from a manageability perspective and a some other pieces here, and then we'll talk about Windows moving forward. One of the big things, though, is we want to give organizations and users, frankly, the ability to treat a Windows device like any other mobile device. So like your iPad, like your Android tablet, like your iPhone. If you're doing things like associating one of those devices with your corporate environment today and walking through an enrollment process, we want you to be able to do that with a Windows PC, too. And from an organization's perspective, we think there's some other really interesting use cases there. A lot of organizations today, they'll buy PCs, they get drop shipped to a common location, someone images them, they put them back in boxes and ship them out to people because they're remote users. We want to enable a use case where instead of that, the user can go down to Best Buy and buy a PC off the shelf and register it and enroll that device from their kitchen table without ever having it in the office. And at the end of that process, have all the apps, all the policies, all the certificates, all the management, and all the capabilities that they would otherwise have in that traditional kind of imaging and shipping type of a scenario. So Windows as a mobile platform is something that we're really enabling in Windows 10. Lots of really interesting capabilities coming there. And this is maybe one of the bigger ones right here. I mentioned before, Windows 10 will be free for every one of you if you have Windows 7, Windows 8, or Windows 8.1. And this is how you'll get it. You'll get it going through a managed in-place upgrade. So you're not gonna have to download and burn a disk and blow away your operating system and reinstall all your apps. That's not the way we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it through an in-place upgrade from Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1. With the idea that your apps don't have to change, your drivers don't have to change, the hardware won't have to change. So long as you can support Windows 7 on that PC, you'll be fine from a capability perspective for Windows 10. Now, I know for myself, and for all of us, I would say, we all have PCs that are configured differently. Probably very few common pieces between all the PCs that we maintain as individuals. Meaning the set of apps, the set of things that we're doing in our Windows PCs are drastically different. There are about 1 billion devices around the world that check into Windows Update every month to get their updates and patches and things along those lines. And of those billion, there are probably about 1 billion unique devices, obviously. This in-place upgrade needs to work across that spectrum of devices. So this is something that has been thoroughly redone from the ground up. Those of us who've been in IT for a long time, we know we've been able to do in-place upgrades for quite a while, but we've never done them because they have not been the world's best way of getting to the next OS. They've been messy, they've left behind weird file, either extensions or directory changes, those types of things. This is completely different. This is one of the biggest pillars of the whole build process for Windows 10, is to ensure that an in-place upgrade was not only doable, but the preferred way to get to Windows 10. So this is what we're going to see from an end user perspective, from a consumer perspective. If you choose to do the in-place upgrade, Windows Update will provide you with Windows 10. It will walk you through the in-place upgrade process, and you won't have to really do anything except for just wait for it to finish in the background. This is also, though, what we're advertising for our enterprise customers. So as an organization, these are things that we're sharing with all of our customers as they look at how to get to Windows 10 inside of organizations. So it's a big change, and one that we think will have a lot of benefit. We should also talk just a second about the store. So in Windows 8 and 8.1, the store, yeah, go ahead. Yep.
How much extra disk space?
So the way that it works today is somewhere around the 3.5 or 4 gig. I haven't looked at the latest build to see, but we know we have devices out there, especially tablets, that have little to no, extra hard drive space. So we're trying to do some things to where we can extract content and use it during the in-place upgrade without having to extract the entirety of the actual OS. So we can kind of do just-in-time extraction and take advantage of, in some cases, where we don't have enough hard drive space, and we maybe will never have enough. So a lot of that is still kind of being worked through, but we've made some improvements on how you can pull down the build, basically, of Windows 10 and extract it in that kind of just-in-time way without necessarily having to have a lot of additional hard drive space available.
Yeah, if I understood you correctly, Windows 10 will be available.
Yep.
What happens at the end of the year?
So what we've said is that if you want to take advantage of the in-place upgrade free of charge, that's a 1 year. We're not saying you have 1 year and then we're going to ask you to pay something. What we're saying is to get on the Windows 10 platform will be free of charge for at least the first year of its availability, meaning there won't be any requirement to buy anything. Now, as far as where do we go from there, to be honest, I haven't heard anything about any kind of a subscription model from a consumer perspective. I think we're trying to look at it a little bit differently, and we're trying to maybe take a page out of some of the other operating systems and other platforms and simply have, a device that comes with the OS when you purchase it, and we'll support that OS and device for the life of the device. So very similar perhaps to an iOS or a Mac type of experience where there's an operating system there, and then at some point that's factored into the price. That's small or large, whatever it might be, and then it continues to mature and update, and there's never an upgrade. Yeah.
So if you have money Windows 7, you just update. Is Windows 7 no longer available on the device?
So if you would like to do kind of a dual boot type of a thing, you can do that, but that wouldn't be through the in-place upgrade. The in-place upgrade will literally change Windows 7 to Windows 10. At the end of that, you'll have Windows 10. The idea being, though, if you encounter a problem in the upgrade, you'll be able to roll back to Windows 7. But once Windows 10 is installed, although I've seen some documentation about how to go back from specific builds early on in the process internally, I don't believe there'll be a direct path back to Windows 7. Yeah.
How long will Windows 7 be supported?
2020. So Windows 7 is still supported through 2020. And there's some other things we'll talk about on the Windows 10 perspective that are kind of similar. Yeah.
What's the advantage to Microsoft?
So, things have changed. A lot of what we do as we work with maybe organizations that you could consider competition in different areas for us, we're now, I think, more collaborative and more open in those types of efforts to try to work better across platforms. I think really what it comes down to is, look, we fully understand you have a lot of choices today. You have a lot of choices in hardware and in software and operating systems. So the idea, I believe, is really to provide value to an investment you've already made. You've already chosen to buy a Windows PC. Let's provide you some additional value on that by allowing you, if you would like, to upgrade to Windows 10. And then going forward, when you go buy another PC, because that's what we would like to see you do, obviously, right? That's our business model, is that you'll enjoy Windows 10, you'll find value in Windows 10, and you'll continue to stay on the Windows platform. There may be some other things down the road tying into Office and some other things, but there's no direct line of sight to those things as it stands today from a licensing or subscription or anything like that. Yeah.
The Norton security systems that we buy separately, will they work in conjunction with Windows 10?
They certainly should. So, some of that's on them to ensure that they'll be prepared for Windows 10. Like we've seen in the past, though, as we release new things, those vendors either make changes or change their supportability to where they're applicable on the new platforms too. So Windows has it built into it. It has some of its own capabilities from a Defender perspective and an AV and anti-malware and that kind of thing. But certainly, things like Norton and McAfee, they'll still have their place. Yep.
Internet Explorer.
So it ships with IE 11. So when we talk about Windows 10 with organizations, that's one piece we always talk about. When you're moving from an older version of IE, when you're moving from an older version of Windows to Windows 10, be prepared to start supporting IE 11. And IE 11 has built into it some compatibility for backwards support of older versions of IE. But from a home-based user perspective, it will have IE 11, but it will have the new browser as well. And you'll get to choose which one is the default. And if you want to just move on and not have IE at all, that will be an option you can make.
Yeah. My understanding that Windows 7 and 8 are limited to a 2.2 terabyte drive. Windows 10 expand that?
Yeah, it has. And that actually happened in 8.1. And it's up, I can't remember the exact number now, but it's, I think it's over 100 terabytes. So, it's It's quite large. We're not quite there yet but you're right. Yes, that change has been made. Yeah.
Maybe a comment back on the Windows cost. I wouldn't expect Microsoft to start charging for it because they're going to make money on the App Store and selling apps. So they aren't going to be hurting for cash. So
yeah,
they will survive.
Yeah.
They do have other sources of revenue, and they will be getting a cut of every app installed.
Yeah, and so that's a good segue back to talking about the store. So the store is going to go through a big change. Today, if you go to the store, it's modern apps, and some are okay, and some are kind of poor, to be quite honest. But that's it, modern apps. The store, just a second, I'll just do it and then come back to you. The store in Windows 10, though, will be a combination of all those other stores from that convergence slide. The Xbox store with music, movies, and games, the Windows Phone store, the Windows PC store, desktop apps, traditional apps. So basically the things that you might want to install on a PC will be waiting for you in the store. Whether it's any of that media type content or it's an actual application. Some pretty interesting changes there. And from a manageability perspective, obviously organizations can customize and trim the view of the store and those types of things. Just a second, so over here first.
Is your monthly update, are you going to make those updates available to like software companies so that they can run a lot of things on their programs? Some of the stuff we use here, it's finicky where you update this program and this program back.
Yeah. So there's some of that. And that's a good segue here to this next piece. Oops. But first, was there a question in the back first?
Go ahead.
Okay. So here's the deal with updates. The regular monthly patch cycle will continue for the security updates and those vulnerability patches and those types of things. But along with that now will start coming new capabilities, new features. Some of the stuff we may have seen today in the slides may not be there when we release Windows 10 immediately. It might come the next month or 2 months later, that kind of thing. And the whole point is that that's okay from our perspective going forward. We want to be able to make changes quickly and get them out to you as consumers quickly, with the idea that things are in flux and things are changing. So we want to continue to add value to Windows moving forward, adding new capabilities, adding new features, and you'll be able to import them and take advantage of them in a really quick amount of time. So to your point, for organizations, there's different ways of interacting with these monthly updates. As an organization, as a business, as an enterprise, we don't assume or we don't expect that you'll be installing these updates the day they become available. That's not the model. The model is as a consumer, so your home PC, you might get that new piece of capability when it is released. And then there'll be several months, perhaps 4 or 5 months, where those updates will be on consumer devices, around 1 billion of them if we hit the marks that we expect. And then several months later, they'll show up as updates that you can consume as an enterprise. You'll have options there. Kind of the root of this, or the moral of this story, is that you have a lot of options for testing and validating and ensuring that things aren't going to break. But keep in mind, we're not trying to make wholesale changes in the OS where we deprecate a capability to build a new one. We're not really trying to do that anymore with Windows 10. We want to build a foundation and then continue to build on it or add to it, so that we can continue to have backwards support and capabilities and not break apps and not make changes that would require a lot of testing and validating. In some ways, this might be similar to view, kind of like things used to be with the Windows updates back, when Windows updates were kind of starting in the 2000s, where at the beginning, I was doing it too as part of running the organization that I supported. Updates would come out. You would test them thoroughly on a subset of devices, ensure that they worked, and then a couple weeks later, you'd roll them out, kind of little by little, because things had a tendency to break, perhaps. But over time, things just happened, they just worked, and by and large now, a lot of organizations, most organizations that I talk to, they're not doing that level of granular testing for the normal monthly updates anymore. The security patches and those types of things, sure, they might go out to a Patch Tuesday group and then roll out widely later that week, but we're not testing like we used to in the past because we've gotten to a point where stuff works. And that's a good point. That's a good thing. And we want this to be very similar, where we can add things, and we're going to have to earn your trust, first of all, as an organization. But the idea here is that this shouldn't be something that causes concern or a great amount of of additional testing to implement this type of new Windows as a service methodology. Now, fundamentally, however, there are organizations, and I'm sure you have devices in 3M that would meet this, where instead of receiving new content, we'd rather stay static and just have a build of Windows that does not receive anything new. And that will be an option. That's something that we call the long-term servicing branch. This is a enterprise-only type of a thing, so this isn't something that, on a home PC would be applicable. But for those devices that do very specific things, in the healthcare space, for example, devices that run healthcare equipment, or air traffic control is another one we commonly talk about. Let's leave those devices static. And when we do that, we'll support that static build of Windows for 10 years, just like Windows 7 was, and Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. So there'll be these different long-term servicing branches that will crop up every couple of years, 2 years, every 3 years, something like that. So the rest of the world will be kind of going, if you think about steps on the stairs, kind of these evolving branches of Windows 10, and organizations that have requirement to stay static, they can jump from one rung kind of up into the future. So it's a new way of doing things. We think there's a lot of value in providing new capabilities on an ongoing basis. The whole point is that this is something that reduces the amount of work and effort it takes to move between versions of Windows. If we just stay kind of up to date and stay static, or stay up to date and stay current, then we don't have these big Windows 7 type migrations anymore. We just have another month's worth of patches that we apply. So it's a new model. It's something that I think there's a lot of good points about. It's very similar to what we do in Office and other products that we support. So definitely something to kind of keep an eye on. But this is kind of the idea here is you get to choose. Yeah.
With the in-place upgrade and a conventional PC and a standard fast connection, how long do you think it would take to install?
Yeah, so there's some other attributes that we have to factor into that. But from what we've seen in testing, from Windows 7 to Windows 10, 25 minutes, half an hour, somewhere in that ballpark. Of course, there's things to consider there, but not the hours and hours, not all day, right? And so as far as slides and things that I wanted to cover, that concludes what I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to share with you. What are some questions that you might have? Yeah.
In 8.1, you have file.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I haven't exactly gone and looked myself to see if that specifically is in Windows 10. I haven't anything to say it won't be, though. And that kind of touches on some things that we added up to Windows 8 as far as roaming settings and doing some amount of backing up on behalf of the user using your OneDrive account, actually. So as a user, when you go between your different Windows devices, things like your internet favorites would be there, your internet tabs even would be there. Your favorites and your commonly used documents would all follow you. Background too, actually, and your layout of tiles. So a lot of that is built in if you choose to enable it to help automate some of those, backup and recovery type scenarios where we just basically offload things to OneDrive. Yep.
It sounds like there perhaps will never be a Windows 11.
So, the name may change at some point in the future, but it's hard to say there will never be, right? Because things obviously, can change drastically. But the idea here is really to start to build Windows 10 and then continue to build on it for the foreseeable future. Yeah. So there's no technical answer for that. A lot of it's marketing. We hear the silly jokes, 7, 8, 9, blah. But yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with we want to have something that we can build on for the future. And so when it was discussed at the highest levels, it was, well, do we want to build on and iterate off of a Windows 9, or should we just skip that and go to Windows 10? I guess the idea was Windows 10 felt like a better name to build upon. Yep.
So what's WU, and
My updates are more frequent than every 4 months. So does
Yeah.
Windows 10 make it 4 months rather than daily or?
Yeah, so WU is Windows Update. So, you know, from your home PC, when you connect and you pull down updates, that's where they're coming from, is Windows Update. Updates, so we have to keep in mind that security updates and new content, new capabilities are different. However, the source is still Windows Update for both. So you're right, you're going to still receive the normal Patch Tuesday stuff on a monthly basis if there's something to push out. And then if there's a new capability, you'll receive that as well. And it might be every 4 months, but it could be as much as every month too.
On the updates for Windows 10.
Yep. And so when we say updates, what we mean is, if any of you went from Windows 8 to 8.1, that is an example of an update. You know, a whole bunch of things changed, new capabilities were added. I don't think we'll do one quite that large, but we might add a capability. So like one of the things we talked about here, let's just choose one randomly, device guard, like I was talking about, that really lockdown capability. That may or may not be there the day that Windows 10 comes out. That capability might be added the month later, that kind of thing.
So there's no way for Windows 10 to identify what device is on and just give features for that device?
It does do some of that. Yeah. So it's going to look at your PC. Windows Update actually captures quite a bit of information about the actual attributes of the device. And the device itself advertises to the operating system quite a bit of information about it, whether it's touch enabled, how large the screen is, a lot of those types of things. And so Windows 10 will be smart enough to apply itself in different ways across different devices to take advantage of what the device manufacturer intended. So things like that tablet mode I showed you. If you have I have an 8-inch Dell Venue, you know, one of those small little Dell Venues. Tablet mode will be the default on that because it doesn't have an attached keyboard. It's, you know, it got a screen size less than, you know, like whatever the differentiator would be. And so Windows reads that and knows to go into tablet mode as the default.
So if I was buying a new HP computer, I would know, it would be Windows 10 after this comes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes.
Different update, like we had one come up 1 month and then I don't want that one. 2 months from now, get the next update. Would I have to go back to the old one a month ago or get update?
It kind of depends. So on your home PC, the answer is kind of no. The idea there is that as we add things, you can so keep in mind all these things are things you can either enable or disable once they arrive. But the idea is from a consumer perspective, we want to keep adding things. So you won't necessarily have a lot of granularity on, I'll choose this, but not that. In the enterprise, however, you'll have more controls over those types of things.
Let's thank Cody for all.
Yeah. Thank you.